Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Well, there you see, Sarah, Chloe said confidently, examining little Annie. Everything is fine with your daughter. The baby, who had just turned 2 months old, seemed to have grown another couple of centimetres since the doctor's last visit. Breathing a sigh of relief, the young mother Sarah thanked Dr. Chloe Miller for coming so quickly. Seeing the rash, she had immediately begun imagining all sorts of horrors before she could even think of everything possible. "Don't overthink it. There's no need to invent things," the paediatrician said, checking the baby's arms and legs one last time. "It's better to call me right away, otherwise you get nervous and you upset the child with your mood. They feel absolutely everything, even though they're just a tiny little thing, aren't they?" Chloe smiled at the baby, and she happily cooed back. "Oh, what would we do here without you?" Sarah said sincerely, putting her hand to her heart. "How wonderful it is that such wonderful and caring specialists are sent to us, even in such a remote place." Chloe didn't reply, only smiled politely in return and began packing her medical bag. The woman turned 35 this year, but for almost 2 years now she had been working and living in Yelchika, a small tiger village lost in the depths of Siberia. Chloe had been allocated a small, bright house and her own office in the local hospital, the only one for many dozens of kilometres around. Despite the fact that Chloe, being a native Muscovite, was used to completely different conditions, the modest and somewhat harsh life of the Siberian wilderness didn't frighten her at all. The woman found a certain special spirituality in such an existence, like the kind felt by monks praying in their ascetic cells in ancient monasteries. "Dr. Chloe Miller! Dr. Chloe Miller, wait!" The paediatrician heard a familiar voice behind her. Brenda Peterson, a kind-hearted blonde woman who worked on the local farm, hurried towards her, carrying a large enamelled milk can. "Brenda, what are you doing? You mustn't run like that. You might fall," Chloe said, watching the woman rushing towards her. "Yes!" Brenda just waved her hand brightly. "What could happen to me? We're all used to it here," Brenda replied, catching her breath after walking quickly. "Sometimes you rush to the cow before dawn thinking, if only everything is all right with her, especially if she's expecting a calf." "Dr. Chloe Miller, I've brought you some fresh milk. We had an especially good yield today." The village resident held out the milk can to Chloe. "Oh, Brenda, you shouldn't have." The doctor tried to refuse. However, the dairy worker was quite persistent. "Take it, take it." She shook her head. "You wouldn't believe how much of this stuff I have at home, and you need it more. You have such important work. You treat our children, doing rounds every day until night. For you, not just milk. Nothing at all is too much. Do you know what the doctor was like before you?" Brenda almost spat on the ground in irritation, remembering the previous paediatrician. She basically didn't care about the children. All she did was come to the hospital to gossip, discuss all the rumours, smear her face with all sorts of cosmetics, and, well, start flirting with our male nurse. Chloe hurried to take the milk can and thank the dairy worker. She felt that Brenda was about to get on her favourite hobby horse again. And so she did. "But no matter what that Petersburg goat did," Brenda continued her rant, "no matter how she tried to charm him, our Mr. Ethan Black wasn't going to notice her at all. You could drop dead." "I understand, Brenda, but I really have to go. I still need to check a lot of documents at the hospital." However, there was no stopping Brenda now. She couldn't calm down until she had expressed all her thoughts and feelings completely. Such was her generous rural nature. Mr. Ethan Black is a bird of a completely different feather. He's that, what do you call it? The woman recalled the right word, hesitating for a second. Ah, I remember. He needs a completely different kind of girl. Brenda looked at Chloe with cheerful cunning and finished, He needs to find a wife like you, quiet, calm, someone who dotes on children. The young paediatrician blushed, feeling herself turn red all the way to the roots of her hair. Brenda, please, you really should. Dr. Chloe Miller, you should take a look at him. Ever since Mr. Ethan Black lost his wife, Susie, he's been living like a hermit for 5 years. The local crowd doesn't suit him. He came to us from the capital too, in his time. Chloe sincerely wanted to disappear through the floor at that moment. Muttering something quickly about having no time at all, she thanked her again for the milk and hurried away from Brenda Peterson. Everyone, literally everyone in the village, was trying to match her with the local male nurse, Ethan Black. Chloe didn't argue. He was a handsome man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a dignified gait, and only 5 years older than her. However, despite the attention Mr. Ethan Black himself showed towards her, Chloe did not reciprocate. For her, the handsome widower male nurse was just a pleasant colleague who did not evoke any feelings in the woman whatsoever. And how could it be otherwise if another person had forever occupied a place in the young paediatrician's heart, her own husband? Chloe hurried to dismiss the sad thoughts, especially since the modest building of their rural hospital, painted in beige and light grey tones, was already looming ahead. As she climbed the steps of the porch, the woman involuntarily thought about how lucky she was that the local residents had welcomed her so warmly and friendly. It is well known that not every outsider, especially from Moscow, can gain the trust of rural residents. Chloe, however, had managed to become practically one of them. In large part, this was because she was literally obsessed with her work. And now, entering her small, cosy office, the woman wanted to immediately start filling out some papers when her attention was drawn to a huge, lush bouquet standing on her desk. Someone had already put the flowers in a vase, so a wonderful fresh scent filled the room. "No, not this," a thought flashed through the paediatrician's mind. "I asked so many times." "Dr. Chloe Miller, knock knock, may I come in?" Mr. Ethan Black, flashing his perfect snow-white smile, slowly squeezed between the door and her office. "Good afternoon to you too, Mr. Ethan Black." Chloe forced a polite smile onto her face. "I suppose these flowers are from you? Do you like them? I decided to lift your spirits a little. Lately you've been looking quite sad. Is everything all right?" Chloe placed the milk can under the table and exhaled confidently. "Couldn't be better." "You just didn't need to spend so much." The woman shifted her gaze back to the bouquet. "Just wishing me a good day is enough. We've already discussed this, Mr. Ethan Black. I am absolutely against any signs of attention at the workplace. For that matter, outside of work too." Black's smile faded slightly. However, the man was not about to give up without a fight. "You know, Chloe dear, sometimes I think you're deliberately teasing me," the male nurse said, his face unchanged. "I just don't understand why you're doing this to me, honestly. I'm even starting to run out of ideas about what else I could do to please you." Chloe looked tiredly at her persistent suitor. "Ethan, how much longer? How else can I explain to you that there can be nothing personal between us? I understand it's hard for you to accept that I don't want to date you, but let's face it. We just want different things from life. Our personalities just don't match. What can you do about it?" The young doctor looked pleadingly at the male nurse. She had lost count of how many times she had tried to explain such seemingly elementary things to him. "Is it because you still love your husband?" The man asked her the painful question. Black knew that Chloe didn't like to remember her past life in Moscow, and yet he never missed an opportunity to remind her of the reasons for her move to Yelchika. The woman's face instantly became impassive. "Excuse me, Mr. Ethan Black, but I am really very busy right now. I'm afraid we have nothing more to talk about." "I understand your feelings like no one else, Chloe. Believe me, I've been in your shoes," Black said in a serious tone. "However, sooner or later, you'll have to return to real life anyway. Sometimes we just have to accept that the closest, dearest people leave us. By letting go of the situation, you can finally look around and see that there are people nearby who care about you. I will wait for you, Chloe. I hope you will soon realize that you and I have every chance of creating a wonderful family." Chloe looked at the male nurse, her lips trembling and her eyes full of tears. "Ethan, please," the woman cried out, pale, unable to control her emotions, and then simply broke down crying like a woman burying her head in her hands. "Cry, Chloe, cry," Black said softly, leaving her office. "Maybe tears will sober you up. How long can you pretend to be a steel lady?" The woman didn't answer him. She simply wasn't able to speak right now. So the male nurse had to leave her, finally granting Chloe the solitude she so desired. Chloe's mood was finally and irrevocably ruined. The rest of the day, the pediatrician spent filling out the medical charts of her little patients and their mothers, as well as seeing babies directly at the hospital. The young woman tried to behave as usual, friendly and polite, however her heart ached. A familiar dull pain combined with strong anxiety began to gradually fill her heart from the moment Ethan forced her to remember her husband again. "David," the girl mentally addressed him every time her soul became unbearably heavy. "I believe we will meet again. Let others say whatever they want. Remind me however they want that you are probably no longer alive. I don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I never will. You are so strong, so brave. You couldn't have just..." In the evening, already getting ready for bed, Chloe sat for a long time in front of the mirror, looking at her face, drawn by heavy thoughts and worries. Who would have thought that in just 3 years, the once young, energetic Chloe would suddenly turn into a woman dried up by grief, whose grey hairs, shimmering like silver threads in her once perfect dark blonde hair, made her look much older and more serious than she actually was before. The young pediatrician loved to read before bed, not professional literature, but the most popular fiction she could get her hands on. Fortunately, in those days, living in the capital, the girl had no shortage of books. Here, the most she could afford was a medical journal, and that was by subscription, which she had so thoughtfully arranged at the post office the same day she moved to the village. No online store delivered books to such a distant and remote region. And to be completely honest, Chloe was no longer drawn to intricate detective stories or magical adventures in romance novels, which she had loved so much once. The world had long since lost all its colours for her, and only her work somehow kept the woman afloat. Burying herself head first in the problems of newborns and their young, and sometimes not so young, mothers, Chloe thus drowned her own pain, which stung her in the very centre of her soul every time she remembered that she herself was unable to have children. Chloe got up from the table where the small mirror stood, and out of the corner of her eye she noticed how thin and plain her figure had become. The expression that loneliness dries up a woman in love described her perfectly during that difficult period of her life. She was lonely, and she loved. She loved with all her soul and all her heart, selflessly and boundlessly, the one and only person who, most likely, was no longer alive. But paediatrician Chloe Carter could not even entertain the thought of, as Mr. Ethan Black put it, accepting it and letting go. But despite all the darkest moments of her reflections, in that same heart where the persistent pain now swirled, there was still a faint hope. A hope that lifted Chloe every morning and made her believe that one beautiful day she would still hear the familiar warm voice of her adored husband. That night, the woman couldn't close her eyes. Her thoughts kept returning to her past, to those wonderful and easy years when she and her husband were truly happy and nothing clouded their quiet family joy. They made grand plans for the future and had no idea that all their hard-earned happiness could collapse in an instant. Chloe felt tears streaming down her cheeks again. "Oh my God," the woman whispered to herself. "David, my dear, forgive me. I'm such a sentimental little fool." In the poor Carter's mind's eye, colourful images of the years spent with her husband involuntarily flickered again, gradually plunging the woman into a deep, yet simultaneously beautiful and sad dream, which the healer of children's ailments herself would have preferred not to see at all, so as not to become even more emotional after her inevitable awakening. Once, Chloe had a completely different life. The bright lights of the capital, work in one of the best clinics in the city, meetings with friends on weekends and shopping trips to fashionable boutiques, all this was an integral part of the young paediatrician's daily life. Chloe was born into a good, respected family of doctors. Her mother worked in gynecology all her life, while her father was one of the leading surgeons at the Scliff. The girl always had the example of her parents before her eyes. Strong, determined, they went straight for their goals and achieved everything themselves thanks to their own hard work and natural talents, as well as the desire to constantly learn and develop in their chosen field. But besides everything else, they also loved each other dearly. Despite having lived together for almost 25 years, their daughter dreamed of continuing the noble dynasty of medics, choosing the field of pediatric medicine for herself. Thus, Chloe managed to combine two of her passions in one profession, medicine and working with children. The girl studied easily and with pleasure, and effortlessly graduated from medical school with honours, after which she almost immediately got a job at one of the best consultations in the city. From there, she gradually moved to an excellent private clinic, where she worked for the next few years, gradually improving her professional qualifications. She met David when she was already a grown and self-sufficient young woman. She was 26 years old at the time. The young rescuer, MCHS employee, completely captivated Chloe with his strength, courage, but at the same time, softness and kindness. Chloe had never met such an understanding man as David before. At that time, she had already had several unsuccessful romances and had become disillusioned with the opposite sex, intending to devote herself entirely to her work alone. That year, she and a couple of other specialists from the clinic were sent on a general quota for training in so-called survival courses. And it was there that the girl first saw her future husband. The muscular blonde instructor immediately made her heart beat faster. His neat 3-day stubble looked so natural yet stylish that Chloe involuntarily thought to herself, is he perhaps tending to it in some special way to maintain it in such an attractive state for all women? Being naturally shy, Chloe wasn't sure if this amazing young man would notice her. So she just continued her training, trying to focus on the main reason she had been sent there. "So, you liked our handsome instructor too?" Jenny, her roommate in the dormitory for student employees who came for the courses, and also a young gynecologist, teased Chloe. "And he's not a simple guy, is he? Did you see how he carries himself with such dignity, as if he knows that if he beckons any of us, we'll immediately fall for him? Oh, get out of here, Jenny. Chloe dismissed her back then, but felt the colour flood her usually calm and clear face. What nonsense are you talking about again? He's handsome, of course, but nothing more. Aha! You were staring at him with all your eyes when he was giving that mannequin artificial respiration, her acquaintance joked. Bet you imagined him doing the same thing to you? Jenny rolled her eyes dreamily, and Chloe just grimaced, wrinkling her charming nose. Ugh, Jen, you're a grown girl, but you're behaving worse than a teenager, honestly. How disgusting. What's disgusting? Do you think if you play the saint, he'll immediately pay attention to you? Jenny easily ran her fingers through her curly hair. You need to be bolder, Chloe dear. Men nowadays don't value modesty in women, but what's scientifically called initiative? Well, let others stick with their initiative. I'm a fan of more classic courtship methods, Chloe replied calmly. If we're destined to meet, he'll declare his intention first. And I, as a decent girl, will see if it's worth building a relationship with him, or if he's just a frivolous man, in a word. Jenny shook her head reproachfully. That's why Frank and Nick both ran away from you, their heels flashing, she concluded good-naturedly. You're too picky, and you think too long before taking the first step. Look, Chloe dear, besides you and me, there are many other beauties hanging around here. They might get ahead of you. But I don't need him, Jenny. Calm down, Chloe burst out, unable to bear it, but immediately felt her heart beat anxiously, as if she was already jealous of this David with some ephemeral other beauties her roommate had just told her about. All right, I'll shut up. She smiled, and turning over in her bed, added, Tomorrow is our final class. This is your chance. Use it, or you'll miss out on your happiness again. Chloe didn't answer, just turned away to the wall. Her face was burning as if it had been rubbed with red pepper, and her heart was beating like a gong in her chest, so the girl thought Jenny would hear this strange sound in the silence of the night room. For the first time since her last breakup, and perhaps in her entire life, Chloe felt such strong emotions towards a man she barely knew. What nonsense, the girl chided herself. You barely exchanged words with him in these 2 weeks, and you're already seeing him as your fiancé. Little fool, go to sleep. Jenny is right. Tomorrow is an important day, the last class, which you need to pass with flying colours. It's not like you came here for nothing, is it? With such anxious thoughts, the girl fell asleep that night. Strangely enough, the next day passed completely calmly. Chloe passed her exam with a solid A and was getting ready to go with the other girls to a creative evening organised for them by the base staff. At the moment when the girl was scrutinising herself in the mirror, trying to make sure her dress wasn't too short for such an event, there was a quiet knock on her door. Come in! Who is it? The girl called out into the corridor, simultaneously adjusting the massive round silver earrings with enamel in her ears. Someone silently entered and stopped behind Chloe. The girl flinched, seeing a familiar yet so unexpected reflection in the mirror. Is that you? My God, how you scared me, Chloe exclaimed, turning around. Standing before her was the very instructor, David Carter, whom she had thought about so often in the past few days. Excuse me, I didn't mean to, the guy faltered, and shyly lowered his stunning blue eyes. In his hand he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he shyly and slowly extended to the girl. Here, these are for you. I'm sorry, I didn't know what flowers you prefer, but we have amazing nature here, so I thought maybe the local flora would please you. Chloe looked up at him, her dark grey eyes wide with surprise. A gentle blush gradually spread across David's face, just like the one that must have appeared on her skin now. "Oh no, I'm very touched," the pediatrician said, accepting the bouquet from him. "These are truly beautiful flowers, better than any roses, really." A timid hope lit up in David's eyes. "I was thinking, maybe you wouldn't mind going to the dance with me. We're having something like a disco at the end of the evening." It's funny, of course, grown men dancing to popular tunes, but still, I've been watching you since last week. Excuse my frankness, but Chloe, I really liked you, so I would be very happy if you would do me the honor of spending this evening with me as my companion. Chloe was so delighted she was speechless for the first minute. Just think, the seemingly stern rescuer turned out to be such a gentle and sensitive person. Truly, you never know what is hidden behind the facade of male brutality and outward calmness. It turned out that David had been tormented by the exact same feelings as Chloe all this time. "Of course I will do you that honor," the girl replied playfully and smiled sweetly at her chosen one. "Just promise me you won't smoke much. You know, there's nothing worse than a partner who has smoked before dancing. I just tolerate cigarette smoke very poorly." David's face lit up with a bright and pleasant smile. "Oh, that wish I can easily grant," the young man said, mimicking a fairy tale genie. "After all, I've never smoked and don't plan to start, so I obey and submit." The guy put his hands together in the characteristic genie gesture and bowed slightly. Chloe, at that moment, didn't know where to put herself out of shame. "My lord, forgive me that tactlessness," the girl exclaimed. "I should have guessed that many of your colleagues lead a healthy lifestyle. It's just that both of my previous admirers weren't averse to indulging in a cigarette from time to time, and I suffered terribly from it afterwards." Chloe looked into David's blue eyes and bit her tongue. What possessed her to mention past men? But today, the emergency service employee took her words with understanding. He didn't seem at all bothered by the mention of the girl's former romances. Offering her his arm, David, like a true gentleman, escorted her straight to the local community centre, where the rescue service staff had already prepared a wonderful concert for all the students with jokes, poems, and even songs of their own composition. Chloe liked the latter very much, and they made a great impression on her. That evening, the girl listened to a real bard song for the first time. "Thank you for this wonderful evening," she thanked her companion when the dancing was over, and they slowly walked under the blooming apple trees to the women's dormitory. "I haven't felt this. I don't know, this free, perhaps, in a very long time. It was so easy to get away from everyday worries and the omnipresent hustle and bustle here." "Yes," David said, agreeing with her. "I've always felt that this place has its own special energy. It's nothing special, just a regular base in the Moscow region, but as soon as you drive a few kilometers away from Moscow, it feels like a completely different world around you. No high-rises, no shopping centers at every turn. Just a calm and measured life where everyone can find their true place." Chloe looked at David and couldn't believe her happiness. Here he was, a person who understood her inner state like no one else. No matter how much she loved the capital with its frantic pace of life, the bright, sometimes garish shop windows of ubiquitous cafes and shops, only here, many kilometers away from Moscow, did she truly feel what life was like. It was as if all her senses were instantly heightened, giving her a secret yet so simple knowledge. Everyone has their true purpose. One only needs to follow it and the call of their heart, and then harmony and grace will surely enter your life. "Chloe," David looked at her unexpectedly seriously, "tell me, can we see each other again?" "Don't take it as impudence. It's just that I feel something good could come of us." "Of course," the girl calmly assured him. Let's exchange phone numbers. As soon as I get back to Moscow, I'll text you right away." A joyful and slightly childlike smile appeared on David's face, and Chloe's heart immediately fluttered, warmed by the light feeling that was beginning to blossom in her soul. Upon returning to the capital, Chloe thought a lot about what this amazing trip had given her. Should she write to David herself, or would it be better to wait until he was free and made the first move? The girl's doubts dissipated when a few days later she received the following message on her phone. "We'll be in Moscow in a few days. Want to meet at VDNKH?" Without thinking for a second and trembling with joy, Chloe immediately replied, "Yes, I'll be eagerly waiting for you." In response, the girl received a playful smiley face, after which she exhaled with relief. It seemed a new stage in her life was beginning. The first date was followed by several more, and soon the relationship between the young people became truly serious. It seemed David and Chloe couldn't spend a day apart. They constantly texted, called, and sent each other sweet postcards, just like young students who had just tasted true first love. Less than 6 months later, David proposed to Chloe. The girl, of course, agreed, promising the young rescuer that she would make him the happiest man in the world. "I'm the one who should be promising you such things, silly," David said, pleasantly surprised by his bride. "Remember, a man's duty is to take care of his woman and give her only love and joy, but also to protect her. You will never regret becoming my wife." Chloe's parents approved of their daughter's choice. David inspired confidence in them and said normal, sensible things. And after a conversation with Mr. Stephen Miller, the girl's father, he became like family to them. "Although I grew up in an orphanage," the guy honestly admitted to them, "I am well aware of what a real family should be like. Chloe told me a lot about your relationship with Mrs. Angelica Miller. If I can come even a little close to something like that in marriage with your daughter, I will be simply happy." "It's good that you intend to make my daughter happy," Mr. Stephen Miller told him. "But what about the fact that your job is dangerous? Any day now you might leave my Chloe alone, and then what?" David was not at all bothered by such a question. "All safety measures for transport and equipment are taken at our base. Monthly diagnostics, and in case of any damage, parts or technically important parts of the equipment are immediately replaced." David spoke to his future father-in-law as if reporting on the state of a service facility to his superiors. Clearly, concisely, so that the man had no doubts, and his work, although fraught with risk to life, was provided with everything necessary to avoid that very risk. As for Mrs. Angelica Miller, she accepted her future son-in-law as if he were her own son. The woman worried that David, being from an orphanage, hadn't received enough motherly warmth in childhood, and so she tried to feed the young man homemade pastries or hot, rich soup at every opportunity. "Here, David dear, try this," Chloe's mother said, pouring the guy a plate of her signature cabbage soup. "I made it specially for you. I had a feeling you and Chloe dear would drop by today." David felt awkward refusing, although Chloe's mother's soup seemed a little heavy for him. Thanking Mrs. Angelica Miller for the treat, he at the same time looked at Chloe with a laugh, who also understood everything but couldn't stop her mother's fit of kindness. "You've probably never tried cabbage soup like this before," Mrs. Angelica Miller continued, fussing around David. "Chloe knows how to make it too, just don't forget to remind her more often, because with her work lately, all she does is eat on the run. And now she won't be able to do that after all. She's getting married. She'll have to feed him properly now and eat well herself so that you have a baby sooner, and a healthy one at that." "Mom!" Chloe couldn't stand it, blushing like a boiled lobster. "That's enough. What baby? We're not even married yet. The registration is only in a month. In general, David and I wanted to live for ourselves for a little while first, and only then think about children." An awkward silence hung in the air. David looked expressively first at his fiancée, and then shifted his gaze to the disappointed faces of her parents. "A little while. How long will that be approximately?" Mrs. Angelica Miller asked with sadness in her voice. "I hope you won't become one of those modern couples who think it's better to get 3 cats, a dog, and a parrot than to have a couple of healthy children. You're not like that, are you?" "What are you saying? No, of course not," Chloe exclaimed immediately. "And how could you even think of such a thing? David and I are absolutely normal people, and we will definitely have children, just not so quickly. I want to work a little longer, after all, to realize myself as a specialist first." "My dear, but nothing prevents you from simultaneously realizing your interests in pediatrics and being a mother," her father reasonably noted. "We are no longer young and would like to cuddle grandchildren while we still have the strength." "Chloe just wants to say," David unexpectedly joined the conversation, "that she and I have decided to wait a year or 2 until we are finally sure we are ready for a baby to appear in our family." "No one is talking about taking away your joy of spending time with grandchildren, Mr. Stephen Miller," his future son-in-law reassured him. "Well, if we're talking about that time frame, then all right," his father-in-law replied, chewing his lips. "So be it. Live for yourselves for now. Just don't drag it out, all right? After all, Chloe's age is already the most suitable. You never know what complications might arise during pregnancy if she wants to give birth after 30. Chloe squeezed the spoon with all her might. No matter how much she loved her parents, such anxiety about her condition and the possibility of giving birth caused her a slight panic. The girl had always known she wanted to be a mother, but she wanted to decide for herself at what age and exactly how it would happen. Her father and mother, however, constantly pressured her, frightening her by saying that her childbearing age had, in their opinion, already crossed all reasonable boundaries. Chloe still had fresh memories of how upset Mrs. Angelica Miller was when she broke up with her last suitor. Rather, the true reason for her upset was not her daughter's personal tragedy, but the fact that she hadn't thought of getting pregnant by the guy to, as her mother put it then, have a child for herself, and thus close the pressing issue in their family. Chloe felt David squeeze her hand under the table. His look seemed to say to the girl, "Calm down, this changes nothing, we will still do as we ourselves wish." Chloe smiled at her fiancé and thought again about how lucky she was to meet a person who truly understood her. The Carters had a modest wedding. From the groom's side, there were only a few of his best friends from the squad. From the bride's side, friends, relatives, and a couple of good acquaintances of her father, specially invited from the Ministry of Health. Chloe and David decided not to have a lavish celebration on purpose. They were going to use part of the money saved on this for the first mortgage payment. The young couple dreamed of their own apartment, as Chloe had been living with her parents all this time, and David was renting an apartment. However, Mrs. Angelica Miller and Mr. Stephen Miller gave the couple a truly royal wedding gift. "Here," the bride's father said to David, handing him the keys to a brand new apartment. A 2-room apartment in the very centre with a metro nearby. 10 minutes, and Chloe dear can get to the clinic without traffic jams. And you'll also have the opportunity to shorten your commute to work a little. David didn't know how to thank his father-in-law, and so he just hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Stephen Miller," the groom said sincerely. "If you only knew how grateful Chloe dear and I are." "Don't mention it," the bride's father waved it off. "I'm doing this primarily for my daughter, so she can live more comfortably. Take care of her and don't forget about grandchildren. Your mother and I will be waiting very much." the elderly surgeon reminded his son-in-law, then jokingly wagged his finger at David. Chloe, finding out that she and her husband would now have their own apartment, squealed with delight and threw her arms around her father's neck. "My beloved daddy," the girl said, kissing her father's cheek tirelessly. "You are the best, my dearest. How did you and Mom manage this?" "Well, we saved a little. I won't hide it," Mr. Stephen Miller said, blushing with joy for his daughter. "Mom and I decided to prepare a family nest for you in advance. We're not animals. We know how hard it is for young people to earn their own housing nowadays." Chloe and David felt like the happiest people in the world at that moment. They looked confidently into the future and believed that a long and wonderful family life awaited them. The first 2 years flew by for the young family like a single moment. Chloe worked at the clinic all the time, and in the evenings she turned into a desperate housewife, constantly cooking something delicious and unusual to please her husband, who returned late in the evening from his dangerous service. David, on the other hand, was constantly on call, in what extreme situations he hadn't been. Chloe, of course, worried about her husband with all her heart and waited for his call with a sinking heart every time. However, God was merciful, everything was all right. Despite the fact that David had to pull people out from under rubble, chase away absent-minded fishermen from a half-melted pond, and do many other things. And then a joyful event happened in their family. One evening, when David returned from work, Chloe met him with eyes burning with happiness and cunning. "What is it, dear? What happened?" her husband asked his beloved wife. "I have a surprise for you," Chloe confided to him and pulled him into the living room. There, on an exquisitely set table, a festive dinner awaited David, such as he hadn't received from his wife in a long time. In the centre, on a large porcelain dish with painting, a large chicken-baked French style in wine awaited him. Nearby, in a saucepan, lay boiled sweet potatoes with rhubarb and the freshest seafood, which Chloe had thoughtfully arranged on a separate dish. And on the other side of the table, in a tall vase, appetizing fruits were visible, and next to them stood a bottle of excellent wine and, for some reason, a carton of orange juice. "Wow!" David sincerely admired. "What's the occasion for such a celebration?" The man kissed his wife and looked at her questioningly. "Did you get a promotion?" "Well," Chloe answered evasively, "you could say that, just not the kind of promotion you're thinking of." "Oh? Interesting," the intrigued husband said, after which his wife sent him to wash his hands, and she herself managed to lay out clean napkins. She really wanted this evening to be remembered by them for a long time, and for that, everything had to look simply perfect. "So, what's the surprise?" David asked a little later, when she had seated him at the table and put steaming chicken on his plate. "I'm so impatient, I want to know." David playfully clinked his fork and knife, showing that he was very hungry and waiting for his wife's answer. "I'll tell you everything now, but first, please open the juice and the wine. I can have—" At first, David didn't understand his wife's hint and calmly began unscrewing the wine cork with a corkscrew when it suddenly dawned on him. "Wait, why do you want juice specifically?" Chloe tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile. She felt herself starting to blush again. She covered her lips with her hand and looked at her husband eloquently. "Are you saying you're pregnant?" David asked softly. Chloe lowered her eyes, then nodded affirmatively. "My God, Chloe dear, we're going to have a baby. My dear, my sunshine, what happiness. I'm going to be a father, do you understand? A father!" David almost dropped the bottle, trying to jump up from the table and hug his wife. When he managed to, he whirled Chloe around in a joyful waltz. The young woman laughed and didn't take her eyes off her beloved husband for a minute. "Think of all the things we have to do now." The man, excited by the happiness of impending fatherhood, said quickly, "We need to decide where the nursery will be, choose a crib. Have you told your parents yet?" "Not yet," his wife replied, shaking her thick hair and not stopping laughing. "We'll tell them together when we go to Mom and Dad's next weekend." David nodded understandingly. "My God, Chloe, I thought this was happiness. A beloved wife and a hot dinner every day, a reliable rear, support. But this is something completely different. How I love you, my dear, how I love you." Exciting, yet so beautiful, days began for the Carters. Everything seemed to remain as before, but now every evening they did things together that all future parents do. They chose a stroller for the baby together, dreamed of how they would paint the wall where they would put the baby's cradle, argued about whether they would have a boy or a girl, and what name they would give their future baby. One day, when Chloe was already 3 months pregnant, she and David decided to spend their day off culturally, so they went to the theatre. The Flying Dutchman was being performed there, and Chloe really wanted to see it. The performance amazed the young woman with its sets and the power of the actor's performance. The evening promised to be completely unforgettable, as after the theatre, David suggested going to a restaurant as well. "But after such a 3-hour spectacle, you and I definitely need to have something unusual to eat," David said joyfully to his wife as they left the Bolshoi Theatre. "You must be terribly tired. I would be a terrible husband if I made you cook something at home after all this. No, let's go, let's eat somewhere nice." "If you do that, you'll be simply the ideal husband," Chloe agreed. "Honestly, I'm ready to eat an elephant right now, or at least a hippopotamus. Those tiny sandwiches in the theatre buffet didn't impress me at all." Dinner was magnificent. Chloe was already preparing to remember this evening as one of the most beautiful in their life together when something completely unthinkable happened. The couple was already heading out to the parking lot. David had called a taxi, and it was due any minute when 3 unknown men blocked their way. Judging by their dilated pupils and the strong smell, these guys were clearly under the influence of alcohol or some other substances, and all 3 of them had tattoos turning blue in the autumn twilight. "Hey, guys!" one of them shouted to the others, and the entire company instantly began studying the Carters. David immediately understood what was happening and peaceably raised his hands. "Hey, guys, don't worry. Let's part ways like civilized people. We don't need trouble. Here." The rescuer took out his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out all the cash he had. "Everything I have, guys. Honestly, take it. Go with God. My wife and I just want to go home, that's all," David said as calmly as possible. However, Chloe, frozen in horror at that moment, felt with every cell of her body how tense her husband was. The tallest of the 3, and obviously the leader of this gang, looked at the small amount David was offering him with appraisal. Then he took a couple of steps towards Carter and with one quick movement snatched the money from his hands. Like a monkey finding a new toy at the bottom of a cage, the convict jumped around happily in front of his henchmen. "Look, guys," he waved the banknotes in front of their faces. "People nowadays are understanding." "Well, I like it," the second one drawled in a nasty voice, and then, out of nowhere, stared intently at the pregnant Chloe. "No fight? No broad for a quickie?" A bald, stout man slowly stepped towards David's wife. "Oh, this broad is quite something, in my opinion," the scoundrel said. "Juicy." David instantly shielded his wife, and Chloe felt her mouth suddenly go dry. A second later, a nasty, sour lump rose from somewhere in her throat, making the woman instinctively clutch her stomach, where the life of her little child was stirring. Fear, a disgusting animal fear for her husband's life and their unborn son or daughter. That's what Chloe felt at that moment. She pressed herself against her husband's back, closing her eyes for a second. "Don't come near her!" David threw in his face and immediately took a fighting stance. "One move, you can say goodbye to your worthless life." "Well, well, this pampered piece knows how to talk too." The third criminal, who was quite muscular, replied instead of his comrade, "Try saying that again. With these words, the villain pulled out a gleaming folding blade, suspiciously resembling a razor, from inside his jacket. "What, not so brave now, huh?" the fat man asked, pointing to his friend's hand. "Now me and my buddies will quickly clean up your face so you know how to talk to respectable people. And your broad is coming with us. Don't worry, it's not far at all, just to the nearest bushes." All three laughed like old hyenas. David seemed to turn to stone, completely ready for a deadly lunge. "When I say so, just run, don't look back," David whispered to his wife over his shoulder. "No, I'm staying here with you," Chloe whimpered pitifully into his jacket. "What are you doing, Bunny? Come out to the big guys." The fat convict continued to coo in the meantime. "The guys really want to play with you, so much so that they're about to take care of your boyfriend." Hardly had he finished speaking when all three rushed at her husband. "Run!" David shouted to his wife, and immediately entered an unequal battle with the three ghouls. He began to strike them with random kicks and punches, trying to drive the convicts away from him. The man couldn't perform any holds, as he risked slowing down too much, which would have been fatal for him. Chloe darted off somewhere to the right, hoping to get around the brute with the razor. However, he was cunning and immediately delivered a powerful blow to the woman's stomach. "Where are you running, Otter?" the convict hissed and grabbed Chloe by the hair, pulling her close. The woman felt first the awful stench of his breath, and then the cold blade pressed against her tender neck. "David!" she screamed, and David immediately lost his guard, taking a crushing blow to the jaw and falling to his knees. "No, oh!" Chloe cried out in a fit of despair and kicked the villain in the groin with all her might. Despite the pain in her stomach, she couldn't let the criminals deal with her husband like this before her eyes. "Finish him, guys!" the tall guy shouted, and he and the fat man began kicking David in the stomach and head. Chloe managed to break free from the brute's deadly grip for a second. However, he managed to slash her across the chest with the razor. Looking down at it, the girl saw a crimson stream soaking her light-coloured dress. "Come here!" the scoundrel roared, and with a short, precise thrust, plunged the weapon right into Chloe's stomach. The surrounding world instantly turned into one large, blurry spot for the woman. The pain was so unbearable that Chloe forgot how to breathe. Whispering her husband's name one last time, she fell and plunged into utter darkness. Out of the corner of her consciousness, Chloe managed to catch the wail of police sirens. Obviously, the restaurant staff had heard the noise in the backyard and called the police. An ambulance arrived with them, but Chloe no longer saw this. A sticky, cold darkness surrounded her on all sides. "Chloe, Chloe dear, can you hear me, dear? It's me, your husband, David." With immense difficulty, Chloe opened her eyes. Above her was a perfectly white ceiling, which at first even blinded the woman with its light. Next to her, Chloe heard a nasty beeping sound. Special medical devices were monitoring her condition. Carter felt a long plastic tube inserted into her nose, through which cool air was flowing. Then the woman felt someone gently and tenderly squeezing her hand. "David?" she said very weakly. "Is that really you? Alive?" Her husband's face, bent over her, confirmed. "It's me, tough cookie. Thank God. But you really scared me, dear. I thought I had lost you." It took Chloe exactly half a second to remember all the events that preceded her hospitalization. "The baby!" the young woman exclaimed in a pale voice, and immediately pressed her hand to her stomach. It was absolutely flat and tightly bandaged. "Our baby, David. What happened to him?" Chloe asked her husband, already sensing the worst. Instead of answering, the man just lowered his eyes, then ran a nervous hand through his hair. "The doctors fought for your life for so long, they had no choice. Our baby couldn't be saved anyway. I'm so sorry, dear. So sorry." "No, anything but that. It can't be." Chloe fell into hysterics. Just then, the attending physician rushed into the ward. "What have you done?" The elderly surgeon looked angrily at David, while trying to restrain the woman struggling in convulsions. "Who gave you permission to tell the patient such news when she herself is on the verge of death? Leave the ward immediately. Nurse, bring me a sedative quickly," the doctor said to the nurse, who rushed in at the same second. "It's better to tell her immediately," David said grimly, getting up from the chair with difficulty. "It would have been even more painful later." The surgeon looked at him, then shook his head sternly. "I understand everything. You're both in shock, but that didn't give you the right to risk your wife's health like that." David seemed to have let the surgeon's words go in one ear and out the other. He looked at the sobbing Chloe with a sense of absolute despair. His beloved was almost dying, and she had also lost their child, and he, an employee of the rescue service, couldn't prevent it. "Chloe, I'll come back tomorrow," her husband said with tears in his eyes, and left the ward. The hardest part for Chloe was yet to come. After a long and painful recovery, the doctor delivered her the grim verdict. Due to the injuries sustained, she would never be able to have children again. The young woman was absolutely devastated. Upon returning home, Chloe didn't remember what was happening around her in those moments. All the days merged into one endless grey streak. David tried to reach his wife somehow, to shake her out of this comatose state, but it was all in vain. Her parents, no less depressed by their daughter's condition than her husband, also tried to talk to Chloe from their side. However, she didn't react to anything at all. No one, except David and her relatives, knew how hard it was for Chloe to get up every morning to return to at least a semblance of herself. Only after almost a year was she able to consciously perceive the reality around her again. The pain of losing the child was still too fresh to completely forget what she had experienced, and the woman's stomach now forever bore the marks of that monstrous evening. Scars. Chloe hid them under dark and thick clothing. She could no longer wear a swimsuit or a light summer dress. She constantly felt that strangers would stare at her terrible cuts. Even with David, she now behaved coldly and reservedly, and she didn't blame him for what happened in any way, but she knew what torment he himself must have been experiencing, and therefore no longer considered displays of their love appropriate. At least, not until this whole story finally dissolved into the everyday life that continued. To recover and distract herself from the persistent longing, Chloe returned to work. Despite the fact that it was unbearably painful for her to look at other people's children every day, the woman increasingly caught herself thinking that she was slowly, little by little, but getting better. The pain very slowly, but surely, went somewhere to the very bottom of her soul, leaving only calmness, bordering on indifference in its place. For a start, even this was salvation for Chloe. And then, when she seemed to have just found stable ground under her feet, her whole world once again crumbled into tiny particles from which she could no longer gather anything. This happened exactly 3 years ago, a year before Chloe finally moved to Yelchika. David had gone on a business trip somewhere north to Siberia. Terrible fires raged there that year, and Chloe's husband, along with other rescue service employees, was called to extinguish the fire from helicopters by dropping a special fire-suppressing suspension. The most terrible thing, for which Chloe blamed herself ever since, was that she felt absolutely nothing, calmly let her beloved husband, the only person dear to her, go on that cursed business trip. 2 days after David left, she received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, Chloe Miller Carter?" a strange male voice said on the phone. "Yes, this is she. Who am I speaking with?" "This is Captain Yuri Lisitsyn of the Emergency Response Squad. Your husband, David Carter." Chloe's heart immediately dropped somewhere into her stomach. It became difficult not just to speak, just to think. "Yes," the woman replied, barely audibly. "Chloe Miller Carter, be strong. Your husband died heroically while fighting a fire in a forest belt." Chloe felt as if the floor beneath her began to slowly move away. Grabbing the edge of the table to keep from falling, the pediatrician asked again, "What do you mean, died? No, there must be some mistake. He only flew out 2 days ago. I'm very sorry," the captain said a little more gently. "Your husband's helicopter got into a difficult situation. One of its blades failed, after which the entire aircraft crashed into the river. We found the body of one of the pilots immediately, but your he was probably carried away by the current down the river. Our divers are already searching the entire area there." Something inside Chloe weakly twitched. Perhaps it was the last strands of her nerves. "Wait, are you saying David's body hasn't been found yet? But that could mean he had a chance. Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he was washed ashore somewhere and needs help." A sad sigh was heard on the line. "If only it were that simple, Chloe Miller Carter," Lisitsyn replied. "The altitude they fell from was considerable, plus the helicopter sustained such damage that... In short, if I were you, I wouldn't have any special illusions, but our team is doing everything necessary now to search that entire area as effectively as possible." Chloe answered the captain coldly and decisively. "Fortunately, Captain, you are not in my place, and you are unlikely to ever be. I will come on the first available flight. I want to personally participate in the search for my husband." "Come now, Chloe Miller Carter. You don't need all this, honestly," Lisitsyn warned her paternally. However, the rescuer's wife was a straightforward person when it came to preserving her family. "Let me decide for myself what I should and shouldn't do, Captain. Give me the address. I'll come." After warning her parents and superiors, the woman set off into the heart of the taiga. Together with members of the search and rescue team, Chloe traversed the forests there back and forth, but unfortunately found no trace of David. "I told you that you were just upsetting yourself for nothing by coming," Captain Lisitsyn complained about Chloe's arrival. "Anyway, we didn't achieve anything worthwhile." "No," Chloe said firmly. "My husband will be considered missing until you find his body. Only then will I accept that he died. Until then, you must continue the search for as long as possible." Exhausted, Chloe returned to Moscow, and the search for her husband continued for several more months. However, it was all in vain. Finally, the woman came to a difficult decision for herself: to abandon everything in the capital and move permanently to a remote taiga village. Yelchika turned out to be just such a place. "Daughter dear, think about it. Mrs. Angelica Miller pleaded, depressed by the whole situation. I understand that the grief of losing David, dear, will stay with you forever in your heart, but you want to leave not only your job and home, you want to leave us too. Chloe's elderly mother struggled to hold back tears. Mum, forgive me, but this is the only thing I truly need right now, the pediatrician explained to her. I can't stay here anymore. Everything reminds me of David and how much we had together, how much connected us, and how much we lost. Mrs. Angelica Miller looked at her daughter with an attentive, understanding gaze. Promise me you'll at least write, her mother pleaded in a voice filled with entreaty. Of course, Mommy, my dear, her daughter assured the elderly woman, hugging her. As soon as I settle in, I'll write right away. I've already arranged with the local hospital. They're taking me right into my specialty. Can you imagine? The staff there is very small, only about 10 people, so there's no need to worry about rumours concerning me. Oh dear, rumours are such a contagion, Mrs. Angelica Miller said, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. Even if you don't want them, they'll appear out of nowhere. You're a new person to them, so at first they won't trust you. They'll be watching you. Be patient for a little while. Maybe you'll fit into their way of life. Just write to me, dear. Don't forget about your mother and father. Chloe hugged her mother tenderly and promised her that she would definitely be all right. The next morning, she was already sitting on a plane, taking her to the distant, unknown Siberian lands. When Chloe woke up the next morning after a difficult night full of dreams mixed with memories, her head ached so much that the woman didn't know what to do with herself. After taking 2 painkillers, Chloe somehow managed to get to her medical office, hoping that the fresh air and the scents of forest herbs would cheer her up a little. However, as soon as the woman delved into the documents, the dairy worker Brenda burst into her office. Dr. Chloe Miller, help! You're the only hope left, Brenda said, breathless from running. Brenda, what's wrong? Calm down. Catch your breath. Shall I get you some water? No time. The blonde, plump woman waved her hand at her. Get ready. Where? Chloe didn't understand. Susie Moss, the granddaughter of our healer Alvina, is very ill. I was at their house the other day, there, in the forest. Brenda vaguely gestured around her. Susie was already, you could say, wasting away before my eyes back then. And this morning I brought them milk, and Alvina instructed me, saying, "Call your doctor here, my potions," she says, "aren't helping." Chloe had heard something out of the corner of her ear about the local hermit Alvina Moss. The elderly woman, who was rumoured to be over 100, rarely appeared in the village, preferring to buy groceries and things through local residents. Chloe didn't approve of the women going to the healer, but she couldn't do anything about it either. They had been accustomed since childhood to consulting her on all matters related to women's affairs. The only thing Carter hoped for was that they would be smart enough not to entrust their lives and the lives of their small children to the midwife. Not long ago, however, a rumour spread in the village that Alvina had a granddaughter. But no matter how much Chloe herself tried to visit her to check on the baby, she could never find the old witch's forest hut. And Alvina's daughter, Ellie, flatly refused to see doctors. She and her grandmother, as Chloe understood it, were fundamentally against modern technology and medicine. "But they've ruined the child with their herbs," Chloe exclaimed anxiously, and immediately began to get ready. "How old is this Susie, anyway?" Brenda thought for a minute. "She's quite small, only about a year old at most." "Even better," Carter said, shaking her head. "Brenda, can you take me that way, to Alvina's? Every time I go there, I get lost." Brenda looked at the pediatrician strangely, then muttered quietly, "Strange. Somewhere. Interesting. the dairy worker replied, louder now. All right, just follow me step by step. The area is swampy. It's easy to stumble. Half an hour later, the two women were walking together in the impenetrable forest thicket. Brenda walked easily and briskly, almost flying over snags and sharp branches that seemed to avoid the village resident. For Chloe, this journey turned into a real hell. By the time they reached the edge of the forest where the neat moss hut stood, Chloe felt squeezed like a lemon, and she was also scratched all over by the local trees and bushes. "Here we are," Brenda said contentedly, pointing to the healer's house. "With your permission, I'll go home. I still have 1,000 chores to do." "Of course, go," Chloe nodded at the dairy worker. "Thank you for your help. It's amazing how I couldn't find their house myself all this time. It seems like it's not far at all, but every time I seem to get off track." Brenda glanced at Chloe slightly suspiciously. Who knows why the old witch didn't let her into her house? Brenda thought on the way back. It means she thought it was necessary. Maybe she felt some competition from her after all. Chloe was a doctor, and a real one at that. Alvina and Ellie never liked doctors. Chloe, left alone, hurried up the porch of the hut and gently knocked on the slightly open door. The pediatrician received no answer. Then she decided to enter herself without an invitation. The atmosphere inside was as mystical as could be, as if Chloe had come to visit Baba Yaga herself. Bunches of various herbs hung everywhere, jars with incomprehensible preserves stood around, and there was a sharp scent of juniper and spruce needles. The young woman went into the living room, hoping that the sick child was lying somewhere here. The room was quite ascetic. An old oak table, a couple of chairs, a kerosene lamp, a dresser, and a couple of framed photographs. One of them showed a girl in a sundress-like dress, similar to those burned in the spring during Maslenitsa. She was standing embracing a very old, wrinkled woman, as if dried up like an olive. Apparently, these were Alvina and her daughter Ellie. My God, how old is Ellie then? Chloe thought to herself in surprise. If it's true that her mother is 100, then this woman is definitely a witch. She even managed to give birth to a child. Chloe put the photograph back and looked at the second picture. And that's when something inside her seemed to break. "What have you come for?" A cawing old woman's voice sounded from behind Chloe. "If I had my way, you'd still be wandering through my swamps. But apparently, a hopeless situation has arisen today. The tiger itself let you through to me." Carter slowly turned to the healer, meeting the gaze of her unkind black eyes, exactly like a raven's pupils. Alvina turned out to be very miniature, half Chloe's height, but nevertheless looked very determined and a little hostile. "Where did you get this?" Chloe asked, pointing a finger at the second photograph. There, with a thick beard and long hair hanging down, stood her David. Of course, he had changed a lot externally, become rougher, and his gaze had become unsociable. But it was definitely him. "You will put the thing back," the old woman said sternly. "It's not yours, so there's no need to look." Chloe's lips trembled with a fine tremor, and her knees instantly gave way, becoming like cotton, just like when she tried to run away from the bandit. "I won't do anything until you tell me where you got this photo," Chloe almost shouted in the healer's face. The woman chewed her colourless dry lips a little, and then finally answered, "You'd better ask him. You'll see him soon. He went to the city after you too, but you missed each other. God knows, such is your fate." Alvina sighed heavily, then asked with emphasis, "Well, are you going to treat my child or not? Why did I call you here?" Chloe seemed to wake up from a long sleep. Everything inside her was trembling. "Show me your granddaughter." The doctor finally nodded and followed the healer into a small room, the ceiling of which was even lower than in the living room. Here, in a tiny crib, lay a small pale girl, only her cheeks were burning with an unusually bright blush. "Is this Susie?" Chloe asked, immediately getting to work. She examined the baby and stared at Alvina in horror. "Well, how is she?" "She's been ill like this since the day before yesterday, and she's only getting worse. I don't understand why my potions aren't helping her." "Do you understand that your granddaughter has pneumonia?" Chloe asked loudly, her eyes flashing. "The girl urgently needs hospitalization. Thank God Brenda brought me to you. A little longer and you would have lost the child. Do you understand that?" The healer's face wrinkled even more, as if she had bitten into a sour apple. "Don't yell. I understood, that's all," the old woman replied submissively. "No, I'm just wondering where her mother is," Chloe asked, looking angrily at the elderly woman. "No, how could you let it get this bad? That's it. Now it's only IV and praying that Susie dear recovers." The child under the pediatrician's hands made a weak sound. "My God, she's burning up," the woman said, and took a syringe and an ampule of medicine from her bag. "And what is that?" "And you're going to inject it?" Alvina asked mistrustfully, looking at the ampule. "You mean microchip my granddaughter? I won't allow it." And the healer blocked Chloe's access to the crib. "Calm down. This is a standard antipyretic used in such cases for children," Chloe replied confidently, looking her in the eyes. The old woman hesitated, but still moved aside, allowing her to give her granddaughter the injection. "Now it should get easier," Chloe said, and looked at the healer. "What words you know, microchip my granddaughter. Imagine that. And how should I know what you newcomers have in your heads?" the healer asked with an indignant tone. "There's Ellie, my adopted daughter. She went into the forest the day before yesterday and hasn't returned. Maybe your colleagues handed her over for experiments?" The next moment, large tears rolled from Alvina's eyes. Chloe realized that the woman was not entirely in her right mind, and it would be better if she took the girl to the hospital with her. With all these thoughts, the pediatrician almost forgot about the mysterious photograph she had seen in the old woman's living room. However, in the next minute, the solution to this mystery appeared to her in person. "Doctor, is she all right?" David asked with unconcealed anxiety in his voice. "I was practically begging Alvina on my knees to let me call a real doctor here." Chloe carefully turned to the man, trying not to faint herself. Her lost husband was standing right in front of her, exactly as he was in that photograph. "David!" Chloe, pale as a sheet, could only utter, "Tell me this is true. You? I'm not imagining things?" The man looked at her for a minute with a bewildered expression, then a spark of recognition flashed in his eyes, and then he grabbed the door to keep from falling to the floor. Memories crashed into his brain like an avalanche. "Zach, haven't you ever seen our village doctor?" the old woman asked, shifting her gaze from Chloe to David and back. "Why is she calling you David? Is that what you were called in your past life?" And then Alvina looked closely at the pediatrician, and only after that said with dislike, "So it was you he was calling for in his delirium back then?" "And I was wondering why I didn't like you right away. I felt you were connected. But I didn't think it was so closely that your thread stretched across the whole country." "Chloe, my dear, it's me, David. You're seeing correctly, darling. How could I forget everything?" Despite the distance separating them, David took 2 wide steps to his wife, who was crying with happiness, and squeezed her in a tight embrace. "I knew it! I knew it! I knew you were alive, David. I talked to you every night, prayed for you, felt that you didn't crash in the helicopter back then. But who took you? Alvina and Ellie? And how did you end up here?" Her husband looked at her with anxiety, but with boundless love, and then said, "I'll tell you everything, I promise. Just please, let's take my daughter to the hospital first. I'm very worried about her condition." "Daughter?" Chloe said in astonishment, and recoiled from David. "So Ellie had a child by you?" A tense silence hung between the spouses for a minute, and then Chloe managed to compose herself and said somewhat dryly, "Yes, you're right. A child's life is paramount." Taking the girl in his arms, the man hurried to leave the hut. He easily led Chloe out of the forest thicket back to the village and, under the surprised glances of the villagers, carried his daughter straight to the hospital. When Susie had received all the necessary help, and Chloe was assured that the baby's life was no longer in danger, she wearily sank onto the small sofa in her office. "Can we talk?" David said softly, entering her office. Chloe raised her eyes, red from worry and tears, to him. "Is there still anything for us to talk about?" she asked in a colourless voice. The man cautiously entered the office and locked the door behind him. "Chloe, I have so much to tell you," he began, "and before that I want to assure you, if I could have remembered even one day of our life together earlier, I would have returned to you in Moscow immediately, honestly." The woman smiled sadly in response. "Apparently you were so happy here that you didn't even have to remember anything. Nothing stirred in your soul while you were hiding with these forest witches?" Her husband grabbed her hands and made her look him in the face. "No, Chloe, you misunderstood everything. I just couldn't remember anything. Do you understand? Couldn't." And David began his sad story. "I was carried by the blast wave directly into the river. I don't really remember how it happened. I just felt a strong jolt and a few seconds of free fall, and then cold and pain. When Alvina found me on the shore, I was severely injured, unconscious. She and her daughter Ellie managed to drag me to their hut, and there—" The man sighed nervously. "There I spent the next 6 months, practically unconscious. These women nursed me back to health. Whatever anyone says, some of their concoctions do have incredible healing power. I don't know, maybe it was something like a coma. And only when I finally woke up, I was like a blank slate, you see? I didn't even remember my name. I didn't know who I was." David rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if wanting to erase all the terrible things that had happened to him from his memory. Chloe listened without interrupting. She wanted to know the whole truth from him, all of it, to the very end. "I learned to walk again. Something is wrong with my back, as I can't always keep my balance now. But it's not scary if you don't try to run too fast and don't lift too heavy loads. My daughter doesn't count," he added, and lowered his eyes. "Ellie was with me from the very beginning. She nursed me, fed me with a spoon, in short, brought me back to life. I'm sorry, but it's true." A bitter smile appeared on Chloe's face. How touching. The woman silently admitted to herself that she was tormented by jealousy. "And then I started walking again solely because I had completely lost my memory. I decided to stay here for a while until I remembered who I was and if I had a family. Naturally, I helped the women with chores, hunted, but I did all this without leaving the forest. Do you understand? Alvina convinced me that I might have been a fugitive criminal, and then there would surely be a wanted poster for me at the police station." "I tried to explain," David told his wife. "There was one," Chloe replied detachedly. "Only on that wanted poster you were listed as missing." Chloe covered her face with her hands, unable to process all this information. "My God, I searched for you for so long, and you—" "I'm alive," David replied firmly. "I'm alive and sitting here trying to explain everything to you." "But how do you explain your daughter?" His wife led him to the main point. David looked somewhere into the distance, transported for a moment into his own thoughts. I love Susie very much and want to take her with me when everything is over and she fully recovers. It was a moment of weakness, Chloe, you have to understand. I didn't remember anything, absolutely nothing. And Ellie was so kind to me. When she said she was pregnant, I understood that no matter what happened, I would take care of my daughter. His wife turned away. She didn't want David to see her face right now. But Ellie is no longer here, Chloe. What? The woman didn't understand. Ellie is gone? Remember Alvina said she went into the forest and hadn't been home for 3 days? Well, I found her today. What happened to her? Chloe whispered, sensing something bad. She's dead, David replied shortly. My God! Chloe exclaimed and covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming. How did it happen? Her husband rubbed his palms, sweaty with fear. Chloe had never seen him so scared. Apparently, she went to gather herbs and berries, but, in short, it was a bear. I only recognized her by her dress and basket. Chloe felt her feet turn cold. Are you going to tell Alvina? David just shook his head. I suspect she already guessed. Let her believe her daughter drowned in the swamp rather than learn such a terrible truth from me. They have slightly different concepts of death here. I buried Ellie right there in the forest, so Alvina, God willing, won't stumble upon her. Alvina said she found Ellie as a lonely teenager. She was supposedly hiding from her stepfather in the forest, so she took the girl in. Don't be angry with her, Chloe. She was really a very good person. What? How can I now, after learning something like this about her? Chloe felt shame burning inside her fiercely. Alas, only after the news of Ellie's death could she see in her the person who saved her husband's life and not a cunning temptress. Chloe, David asked quietly, shall we leave here when Susie gets better? Leave? Will you be able to forgive me? Chloe looked into her husband's blue eyes and in that same second made the only right decision. Of course, David. I'm still your wife. And so it happened. As soon as little Susie recovered, David and Chloe, quickly packing for the journey, were ready to take the bus to the nearest airport that same evening, from where a helicopter could take them to the mainland, and from there they could get to Moscow by a regular plane. David wanted to go say goodbye to Alvina when Brenda shocked him with tragic news. It turned out that the old healer had passed away the night before. Apparently, she couldn't survive the loss of her daughter, the dairy worker suggested then. And her age too, no one knew exactly how old Alvina Zachary was. Chloe, upon hearing about the old woman's death, even shed a tear. However she felt about her and her unconventional methods of treatment, she never wished her such a fate. Don't worry, Dr. Chloe Miller, Brenda assured her. We'll bury Alvina properly, according to Christian custom. The paediatrician thanked the kind village woman, and saying goodbye to everyone except the persistent male nurse Black, left with her husband and Susie back to the capital. Upon returning home, they first officially adopted little Susan and restored all of David's documents. Chloe's parents were happy to learn that their son-in-law was alive after all. They held a big celebration for the occasion, and Susie became their long-awaited granddaughter, who came to them almost 10 years after their daughter's wedding. David returned to work in the rescue service, but due to the injury he sustained, he could no longer work in the field, so he returned to what he had started with. Now he consults and trains young recruits. He is now full of strength and energy and wants to make his life calmer and more constructive, dedicating most of his time to raising his daughter and his beloved wife. Chloe, meanwhile, continued working at the clinic, returning to her previous duties. As before, she treats children, only now her own little daughter awaits her at home, whom she loves more than life, and for whom she thanks God every day. Thus, having gone through a series of misfortunes and trials, the Carter family finally found a second chance at happiness. And this time, they are not going to let it slip away.